He said it without flinching, no hesitation, no apology, just 4 words delivered like a verdict from a man who had never once in his 34 years been told no by anyone who wanted to keep breathing. Get rid of it. Zuri Bennett stood in the center of Seo Kang-jun's penthouse. 43rd floor, floor-to-ceiling glass, soul glittering below them like a kingdom that belonged entirely to him. And she felt something inside her chest go very quiet. Not the quiet of calm, the quiet of a building the moment before it collapses. She had come to him with shaking hands and a test she'd taken 3 times because she couldn't believe it herself. She had come to him because she loved him. Because for 8 months she had believed, against every instinct she possessed, that the man beneath the tailored suits and the cold commands and the eyes that never softened in public, that man was real. That he had chosen her the way she had chosen him, completely. Kang-jun, I don't want a child, he said. He was standing at the window with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, and he didn't turn around. Children are liabilities. They become targets. You understand what I'm telling you? She understood. She understood that he had just told her their child, their children, though she hadn't said twins yet, hadn't gotten that far, were problems to be eliminated. She understood that in the 8 months she had spent learning the specific silence of a man who showed love through proximity rather than words, she had been wrong about what that silence meant. Look at me, she said. He turned. And that was the worst part. Because his face was exactly what it always was. Controlled. Unreadable. Not cruel. Cruelty would have been easier. Just decided. The way he looked when he closed a business deal. The way he looked when he ordered men removed from rooms. Zuri picked up her coat from the chair. She didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say to a man who had just looked at the news of his own children and felt nothing except inconvenience. She walked to the elevator. He didn't follow. The doors closed. She never went back. That night, if you're watching this and you have ever had to make a choice between love and survival, between what you wanted and what you knew was right, hit that like button right now, because this story is going to go somewhere you do not expect. Leave a comment with the city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because what happens 5 years later when these 2 people end up in the same room again, with 2 children between them and a dead man's switch on the table, is the kind of story you do not want to walk into halfway. The morning Zuri Bennett walked into the Chicago offices of Meridian Commercial Properties, she had exactly 47 minutes before her first meeting, a travel mug of coffee that had gone cold somewhere on the red line, and a text from her mother that read, "Call me when you can, nothing urgent," which always meant something urgent. She had learned to triage her emergencies. 5 years of doing everything alone had made her efficient in ways she hadn't anticipated. Not efficient like a machine, efficient like someone who has accepted that the margin for error is 0 and built her life around that fact. She knew the exact number of minutes it took Elias to find his left shoe on a school morning. She knew which of Nyla's teachers would send an email versus call. She knew her own body the way a pilot knows an aircraft. Every warning light, every tremor that meant something was coming, every system she needed to monitor constantly to keep everything airborne. She was 32 years old, and she had not slept more than 6 consecutive hours in 5 years, and she was, by most observable measures, thriving. Her office was on the 22nd floor. Glass walls, which she had initially hated. She'd spent enough time in glass towers in Seoul to have complicated feelings about transparency, but had eventually come to terms with because the view of Lake Michigan on a clear morning was the closest thing she had to a daily reminder that she had made it, that she was still here, that the choice she made 5 years ago in an elevator in South Korea had been the right one. She sat down, opened her laptop, and found the file that had been sitting in her inbox since the previous Friday marked high priority in red. Hasong Global Acquisitions, proposed purchase of the Callaway Tower. Lead executive, Bennett. She almost didn't open it. She had 3 other acquisitions in progress. A junior associate who kept sending her first drafts that read like press releases, and the previously mentioned cold coffee. But the acquisition was significant enough. The Callaway Tower was one of the last major independent commercial properties in the Loop, assessed at just over $800 million, that she clicked through. She scanned the buyer profile. Korean-based investment holding company, international portfolio, clean regulatory history, no outstanding litigation, The kind of buyer her firm dreamed about. Straightforward capital, no complicated financing structures. Apparently just wanted the building. The name Ha-sung didn't register. There was no reason it would. She had spent 5 years being very deliberate about not tracking the legitimate business entities connected to the name. She never let herself think. She had built a wall around that knowledge, and she maintained it the way you maintain a structural wall, constantly, carefully, and with the full awareness that the house falls if it fails. She closed the buyer profile and pulled up the building specs instead. Her phone buzzed. A text from her babysitter. Elias told Nyla that dinosaurs could breathe fire, and now she won't eat breakfast because she's scared of fire. Just FYI. Zuri typed back. Tell him I said that's factually incorrect and he owes his sister an apology. Then, there's cereal in the cabinet above the microwave, not the regular cabinet. Then she put her phone face down and made herself focus. She was good at focusing. She had built focusing into a survival skill. The Callaway Tower meeting was scheduled for 10. Ha-sung's representatives were supposedly flying in from Seoul. The email from her managing director had mentioned a senior acquisitions team, possibly including the company's principal investor, which was unusual for a first-sight meeting but not unheard of for a deal this size. She prepared the way she always prepared, thorough, specific, no wasted slides. She knew the building's occupancy rates by floor, its deferred maintenance schedule, the 2 ongoing lease disputes on floors 14 and 16, the HVAC system that was technically functional but would need replacement within 3 years. She knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. She was very good at knowing where bodies were buried, also metaphorically speaking. At 9:52, she walked into the Callaway Tower lobby for the pre-meeting walkthrough. The lobby was marble and soaring ceilings and the specific smell of old money that had been very carefully preserved. She had always thought the building felt like a man who had been important once and was still insisting on it. Her associate Marcus was already there, bouncing slightly on his heels the way he did when he was nervous, which was most of the time. He was 26 and enormously talented and occasionally reminded her of herself at 26, which mostly made her want to protect him from things she couldn't name. Ha-sung team is already upstairs, he said. They came early. How early? Like 45 minutes early. That was unusual. She adjusted her grip on her portfolio. How many? 4, 3 security. He lowered his voice. There are actual security people, Zuri, like earpieces. It's an $800 million deal, Marcus. Right, yeah, okay. She stepped into the elevator, pressed 38, watched the numbers climb. She had a rule about elevators. She didn't let herself think in elevators. Too many of her worst memories were attached to the specific sensation of enclosed upward movement, so she had trained herself to go blank, to look at the numbers and think about nothing until the doors opened. 38. The doors opened. She stepped out into the Callaway's top-floor conference suite, and the first thing she registered was the security. Marcus had been right. 2 men near the windows, 1 near the door, all of them carrying themselves with the particular stillness of people trained to neutralize threats, which was not how security usually presented at a real estate meeting. The second thing she registered was the view. Chicago spread out in every direction, winter gray and enormous and alive. The third thing she registered was the man standing with his back to her at the far window. And her body knew before her brain did. Her body knew from the set of his shoulders, from the exact angle at which he held himself, from the particular quality of stillness that she had spent 8 months learning and 5 years trying to forget. Her body sent up every alarm it had simultaneously, and her feet stopped moving and her coffee almost hit the floor. He turned around. Seo Kang-jun looked exactly like he had the last time she'd seen him. Older, maybe. The same controlled face, the same dark eyes that gave away nothing. The same way of occupying a room as though the room had been built for him specifically. He was wearing a charcoal suit, and he was looking at her, and his expression was doing something she had never seen it do. It cracked. Just for a second. Just long enough for her to see something move through him. Shock, or recognition, or something she didn't have a word for, before the mask came back down. "Ms. Bennett," he said. His English was flawless. It had always been flawless. "I was told you'd be leading the acquisition." He was lying. She knew he was lying. She didn't know how she knew, after 5 years and a complete reinvention of her entire life, but she knew. "Mr. Seo," she said. Her voice came out level. She was very proud of her voice in that moment. "Welcome to Chicago." She made herself walk the rest of the way into the room. She made herself set her portfolio on the conference table and open it and look down at the pages that swam briefly before coming back into focus. She made herself breathe. She had spent 5 years preparing for a lot of possibilities. She had spent 5 years with a dead man's switch ready and legal documentation in order and a contingency plan for nearly every scenario she could imagine. She had not, in 5 years, imagined this exact room with this exact man and the specific particular way her heart was doing something in her chest that she refused to name. "Should we start with the structural assessment?" Marcus said from somewhere behind her, his voice slightly higher than usual. "Yes," Zuri said. "Let's start there." She sat down. Kongjun sat across from her. The security team settled into their positions. Marcus pulled up the presentation. And for 40 minutes, Zuri Bennett discussed HVAC systems and occupancy projections and deferred maintenance timelines with the father of her children, who did not know that his children existed 3 miles away, eating cereal and arguing about dinosaurs. And she kept her face completely still and her voice completely professional, and she did not let a single thing show. This was the discipline 5 years had given her. When the meeting broke for lunch, she excused herself, walked to the women's room at the end of the corridor, stood over the sink with the water running, and let herself shake for exactly 90 seconds. Then she fixed her lipstick, checked her phone, 2 texts from her babysitter, both fine, and walked back out. He followed her. She hadn't expected that. She was in the corridor adjusting her portfolio strap when she heard his footsteps behind her. She recognized his footsteps, and the fact that she recognized his footsteps after 5 years said something about her she didn't want to examine, and she stopped walking before she'd decided to stop. "We should speak privately," Kongjun said. "We're in the middle of a professional meeting." Zuri, her name in his mouth. She had spent 5 years trying to unhear the way he said her name. She had done an excellent job, mostly, until this exact second. She turned around. "Whatever you have to say to me personally can wait until after the professional portion of this relationship is concluded. Or it cannot happen at all. Those are the options." Something moved behind his eyes. Not the crack from earlier. This was something more contained, more deliberate. The way he looked when he was deciding something. "I've been looking for you," he said, "for 5 years." "I know." That stopped him. She watched it stop him. The slight adjustment in his stillness. The barely perceptible tightening around his jaw. "You knew I was looking." "I'm a commercial real estate executive, Kongjun, not a ghost. I have a LinkedIn profile. I know exactly how visible I am. I also know exactly what protections I have in place." She met his eyes. "I made sure you could find the professional version of me when it became relevant. I didn't expect it to become relevant this way." "What protections?" "That conversation happens in a different room." She held his gaze for 3 seconds. She counted, and then looked away first deliberately, as a choice, not a retreat. "Let's go finish the meeting." She walked. He followed, which she'd expected. Kongjun had never once in his life been in a situation where he didn't set the terms, and she could feel his disorientation like a change in air pressure, and she was not sorry for it. The meeting resumed. The afternoon session covered lease negotiations and acquisition timeline. Zuri presented. She was good at presenting. She was good at being the most competent person in any room she entered, not because she needed to prove something. She had grown out of that particular need, mostly, but because being competent kept people from looking too closely at anything else. At 3:47, the door to the conference suite opened. Her babysitter, Amara, 23, reliable, who had worked for Zuri for 3 years and knew the emergency protocol, which was specifically, "If something happens and you can't reach me, come to the Callaway Tower," appeared in the doorway, looking equal parts apologetic and panicked. Behind her were Elias and Nyla. Elias first because he was always first, shoulders already set with the particular 5-year-old confidence of a child who had never once been told the world wasn't built for him, which was exactly how Zuri had raised him. He had her coloring, her mouth, her stubbornness already visible in the line of his jaw. But his eyes. His eyes were his father's. She had known it from the moment he was born, and she had never said it to anyone. Nyla behind him, smaller and more cautious, holding onto the strap of her backpack with both hands. She had Zuri's exact face at that age, which Zuri knew from photographs, and her father's capacity for stillness when she was assessing a situation. "Mommy," Nyla said, immediately locating Zuri across the room with the particular radar of a child who has been raised to be alert to exits and the position of her primary protector. Zuri was already moving. She crossed the room in 10 steps, crouching to put herself at their level, putting her body between them and the table of strangers. Her hands went to both of them automatically. Hey, what happened? Amara, what? I'm so sorry, the school called and said there was an incident. Elias. I didn't start it, Elias said immediately. He bit someone, Amara said. He told me dinosaurs weren't real, Elias said, with such absolute certainty about the justness of this response that Zuri had to physically suppress something. We will discuss the biting, Zuri said quietly, later. Right now I need you both to… She felt it before she looked up. The change in the air. The silence from the table that had a different quality than the professional silence of a moment ago. She looked up. Kangjun was standing. He had not moved from his chair in 4 hours except when courtesy required it. He was standing now with the particular quality of a man whose entire body has registered something that his brain is still catching up to, both hands flat on the table, and he was looking at Elias. Elias, who had noticed the man standing and turned to look at him with the fearless curiosity of a child who had been told, consistently, that he had every right to look at anything he wanted. They looked at each other. And Zuri watched Kangjun's face do something she had believed for 5 years it was incapable of doing. It broke open. Not the crack from the window, not the controlled shift of a man recalibrating. Something structural. Something that couldn't be put back. His eyes moved from Elias to Nyla and back to Elias, and she watched him do the math she had been dreading for 5 years. Watched him see his own face in miniature. Watched 5 years of whatever he had been living with land on him all at once. His knees hit the floor, literally. The feared head of South Korea's most powerful criminal syndicate, the man whose name made other crime bosses take longer routes home, folded to his knees on the carpet of a Chicago conference room, and his mouth was open and there were no words coming out. Elias looked at him. "Why are you on the floor?" Elias asked, with genuine curiosity. No fear. Kangjun opened his mouth, closed it. "Mommy," Nyla said quietly, pressing herself against Zuri's side. "Who is that man?" And Zuri looked at the man on his knees, the man who had told her to get rid of it, who had not turned around when she walked to the elevator, who had spent 5 years searching for her while she spent 5 years making sure she was unfindable, until she chose otherwise. And she felt every wall she had built go rigid, every contingency plan she had prepared activate in the back of her mind. And she said the only thing she could say. "Someone I used to know," she said. Her hand found Elias's shoulder. Her other arm wrapped around Nyla. She kept them close, kept herself between them and him, and she held Kangjun's eyes across the room and let him read in her face the simple, implacable truth. "You are not in control of this situation. You have never been less in control of anything in your life, and I have been ready for this moment for 5 years." He read it. She could tell he read it. He stayed on the floor. Nobody moved. That was the thing Zuri would remember later, not the specific expression on his face, not the sound Amara made from the doorway, not even Elias's total absence of fear in the presence of a man who had spent the last decade making other men's hands shake. What she would remember was the specific quality of the stillness in that room. 12 people, not breathing, watching a man on his knees on corporate carpet, and the only sound was the wind off the lake pressing against the glass 40 floors up. Then one of Kangjun's security team moved. The one near the door, she would later learn his name was Park, former South Korean Special Operations, 7 years with Kangjun, took one step forward, hand already at his jacket. "Don't," Kangjun said, quiet, absolute. Park stopped. Kangjun looked at Elias for another 3 seconds. Then he looked at Nyla. Then he looked at Zuri, and whatever had broken open in his face a moment ago was rebuilding itself in real time. She could see the effort of it, the deliberate construction of control over something that clearly did not want to be controlled. And he got to his feet. He didn't say anything. He straightened his jacket, which didn't need straightening, and he looked at the 3 men from his team, and something passed between them that required no words. And then he looked at Marcus, who had been standing near the presentation screen for the past 30 seconds, with the expression of a man watching a car accident from the sidewalk. "We'll continue tomorrow," Kangjun said. To Marcus. "Professional." measured, like the last 4 minutes hadn't happened. Marcus nodded with significant speed. Absolutely. Of course. Yes. The Hasung team gathered their materials. Park held the door. The other two security men filed out. Kang Jun was last, and at the threshold he stopped, and he looked back at Zuri over the heads of both children. She met his eyes, held them. He left. The door clicked shut, and Zuri let out a breath that she'd been holding so long her ribs ached, and Amara said, "I am so sorry. I didn't know what to do. The school called, and Elias said, 'Can we get pizza?'" And Nyla had not let go of Zuri's arm and was still watching the closed door with the particular wariness she'd been born with, that watchfulness that Zuri had never quite known where it came from until this exact moment. "Pizza's fine," Zuri said. Her voice was even. "Remarkable, really." "Amara, take them down to the lobby. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Are you? 10 minutes. When they were gone, she sat down in the nearest chair. Not her chair, somebody else's chair. She didn't care. And put both hands flat on the table and looked at her own knuckles and made herself think. Not feel. Not yet. Think. He knew. There was no version of this in which he didn't know. She had watched him look at Elias, and she had watched him do the math. And the math was obvious because her son had the man's eyes in her son's face, and there was no ambiguity in that. None at all. He knew. The question was what he would do. She had plans for this. She had made plans. She opened her phone and pulled up a thread of messages she had never needed to send and stared at the first one for a moment, then locked the screen. Not yet. She stood up, straightened her blazer, picked up her portfolio. She went down to get her children. The pizza place was 3 blocks from her apartment, and her children ate it with the focused intensity of people who had opinions about crust, which they did, loudly. And Zuri sat across from them and drank water and let their noise fill up all the space in her head where the thinking had been. "Mommy, Elias said the man fell down because he was tired," Nyla announced. "I said maybe he was tired," Elias corrected, with the precision of a child who understood the difference between assertion and hypothesis, which she had specifically taught him. "He wasn't tired," Zuri said. "Was he sick?" "No." "Then why'd he fall down?" Zuri looked at her son, at the eyes she'd been looking into for 5 years that she'd spent 5 years not naming. "He was surprised," she said. "Sometimes people fall when they're very surprised." Elias considered this with the seriousness he brought to most things. "I've never fallen from being surprised." "You've never been surprised the way he was." "What surprised him?" She picked up her water glass. "Eat your pizza." He ate his pizza. He would ask again later. He always circled back. It was one of the most exhausting and admirable things about him. But for now he let it go, and she was grateful. And she sat there in the noise and the warmth of this small, ordinary restaurant that she had chosen specifically because it was 3 blocks from her apartment and 14 minutes from the nearest hospital, and on a street with 2 exits she had mapped on her second week in the neighborhood. And she thought about what happened next. He called at 9:47. She had put the children to bed, Nyla in 6 minutes, Elias in 23 after 2 arguments about whether dinosaurs felt emotions, and one about the structural fairness of bedtimes. And she was sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop open and her phone face up, and she had been waiting for it, and she still flinched when the screen lit up. Unknown number, Seoul area code. She let it ring twice. Then she picked up. Silence on his end first. She recognized that too. The pause that wasn't uncertainty, it was him deciding how to begin. It was him choosing his opening the way other men chose weapons. "You knew I'd call," he said. "I knew you'd call tonight. I thought it would be earlier. I needed time to think." "So did I, 5 years ago." A beat, longer than she expected. "Zuri?" "Don't," she said. "Whatever you're about to say, the version where you explain yourself, the version where you're sorry, the version where you have reasons. I have heard all of those speeches in my head for 5 years, and I am not interested in the live version tonight. I wasn't going to apologize." That stopped her. She hadn't expected that either, and she recognized the tactic. He had always been better than anyone she'd ever met at saying the unexpected thing, at coming in sideways. But it still landed. "Then what were you going to say?" "I want to see them." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the city made its usual sounds. A siren somewhere distant, someone's television through the wall. Ordinary sounds. She had built her whole life around ordinary sounds. No, she said, they're mine. You told me to get rid of them 5 years ago. In your penthouse. You told me, I know what I told you. Then you understand that you don't get to use the word mine. His breath came through the phone. She could hear him the way she had always been able to hear him. The specific quality of his silence when he was controlling something, and the specific quality when he was not quite managing it. This was the second one. I have rights, he said. You have rights, she repeated. You want to discuss rights. Okay, let's discuss rights. You can pursue legal paternity in a United States court. Your name is currently not on any document connected to my children. You are a foreign national with documented connections to organized crime. I have a legal team that has been waiting for exactly this conversation for 4 years. You are welcome to begin that process, and I look forward to every single day of it. The silence this time was different. You prepared for this, he said. I prepared for everything. The dead man's switch. She hadn't said those words to him. She hadn't said them to anyone except the attorney who had drawn up the documentation. Her hand tightened on the phone. Where did you hear that? I didn't. I'm very good at reading people, Zuri. You always were too confident in meetings for someone who was nervous. You had something in your pocket during that entire presentation. What is it? She considered not answering, but she had prepared this conversation too, had rehearsed the moment when she would have to show her hand, and she had decided a long time ago that showing it on her terms was better than having it taken. Financial documentation, she said. Specifically, records of 17 shell corporations connected to Hasung Global and its parent holding companies. Offshore accounts. Transaction records. The kind of documentation that would be very interesting to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and to the international prosecutors currently building cases against 3 of your former business partners. Silence. Encrypted, she continued, and held by 3 separate attorneys in 3 separate cities with instructions to release it under specific circumstances. The circumstances being, anything happens to me, anything happens to my children, any attempt to remove them from the United States without my explicit documented consent, I understand what a dead man's switch is, he said. Good. Then we don't need to go over the mechanics. Another long pause. She heard him exhale. Not a breath. An actual exhale. The kind that comes from somewhere deeper than lungs. How long have you been building this? He said. 3 years. It took me 2 years to find all of it. Another year to make sure it was solid. You were building it while running the legitimate career. I was building it while raising 2 children alone and running a legitimate career. Yes. She heard something happen in the silence after that. Not guilt. She was not naive enough to believe she could hear guilt across a phone line from a man who had spent 30 years building walls between himself and that particular emotion. But something adjacent to it. Something that wasn't nothing. I'm coming to your office tomorrow, he said. 9 o'clock. The professional meeting is scheduled for 10. 8:59 then. Kong Jun. I'm not going to do anything, he said. I know what you have. I understand the position. A pause. I just need to talk to you in person, without a conference table between us. She should have said no. She had several specific reasons to say no. All of them logical. All of them the kind of reasons she had been making decisions from for 5 years. The logic was sound. The answer should have been no. 8:55, she said. You come alone. No security inside the building. They can wait outside. She hung up before he could agree or disagree because she knew he would agree, and she didn't want to hear the specific quality of his voice when he did. She didn't sleep. She had expected not to sleep. She lay in the dark and listened to the sound of her apartment, Elias snoring slightly, which he had done since infancy and which he would be furious to know she found endearing, Nyla's total silence that was somehow equally characteristic. And she made herself go through the contingencies again. All of them. Every variable she had accounted for, and the ones she hadn't, and the one she specifically hadn't been able to account for, which was the way it felt to be in the same room as him again. She was 32 years old. She had lived through things that would have broken people she knew, and she knew that because she had watched some of them break. She was not broken. She was deliberately, specifically, not broken. But she was also not made of stone, and the problem with that, the problem she had understood theoretically but apparently not practically, was that a man who had once found every crack in her architecture still knew exactly where those cracks were. Even after 5 years. Even after everything. She got up at 5:30, made coffee, and sat at her kitchen table until the kids woke up, and she was steady by then. She had always been able to manufacture steadiness when she needed it. It was one of her most useful and most exhausting qualities. I was there at 8:53. She was already in the lobby because she had arrived at 8:40, and she was not going to let him be the one already there when she arrived. Small things. She had learned to fight for the small things. He came alone as agreed. No earpiece she could see, though she assumed the security team was outside, probably one of them parked directly in front of the building. He was in a dark coat, no tie, and he looked like what he was, a man who had not slept either, and who was not used to situations he could not resolve through force or money or the specific authority his name carried in rooms she would never enter. She held the lobby door and didn't say anything. They took the elevator up. She had chosen a small conference room on the 6th floor, away from her regular office, on a floor where she had called ahead to make sure it was empty. And in the elevator, she stared at the numbers and thought about nothing, the way she had trained herself, and she was aware of him 3 feet to her left with the same old awareness, the same physical register, the same specific gravity that had always made him impossible to ignore in any room. The doors opened, and they walked in silence to the conference room. She opened the door and went in, and he followed her, and she left the door open behind her, which was both a practical and a symbolic choice. She sat. He didn't, at first. He stood at the window. Different view here, no lake, just the street and the brick of the building across, nothing cinematic. And he looked out for a moment, and then he turned. "Tell me their names," he said. She hadn't expected that to be the first thing. She had expected the documentation conversation, or the rights conversation, or possibly some version of the apology she'd told him not to give. She looked at him. "Elias," she said, and "Nyla." Something happened in his face when she said them. Contained, controlled, but there. She watched him absorb both names like they were physical things. "How old?" He stopped. Did the math himself. 5. In March. He sat down. Not across from her, at the end of the table, at an angle, which was something she had noticed about him years ago, that he never liked to be directly across from people, that he positioned himself at angles because it was harder to confront something head-on when you came at it sideways. It had been one of the first things she'd understood about him. She'd understood a great many things about him 5 years ago that she had spent 5 years wishing she didn't know. "Elias," he said again, like he was testing it. "Don't," she said. "Don't say their names like that." "Like what?" "Like they're yours." His jaw tightened. "They are. They are my children. They have been my children every day for 5 years, alone, without—" She stopped herself. Breathed. "I didn't come here to do this." "Then why did you agree to this meeting?" "Because you're here and the deal is real, and I needed to understand what you intend to do." "I intend to be in their lives." "That is not a decision you make. Zuri, you don't walk in here after 5 years and announce intentions. You don't get to do that." She held his gaze. "I built a life. I built it from the floor up. I didn't have—" Her voice did something she didn't want it to do, and she corrected for it immediately. "I didn't have anything when I left. I had a passport and $4,000 and 17 weeks of pregnancy, and I built everything else from that. And you want to sit here and tell me about intentions?" The silence after that was the kind that had weight. She could feel it. "I know," he said, quiet. "Don't. I know that Kang-jun, I am telling you clearly, whatever version of accountability you have arrived at, whatever understanding you believe you've reached about what you said to me that night, I don't need it. I don't need you to understand it. I need you to tell me what you are going to do practically, and then I need to know whether I'm activating my legal team today or whether we're going to find another way to handle this." He looked at her for a long time. The way he used to look at her in Seoul when she said something that got past all his defenses, which she had learned to do eventually, which she had been proud of, which had cost her more than she wanted to calculate. "I don't want to fight you," he said. "Then don't." I want to. He stopped, started again. I want to make it right. I know I can't. I know the math doesn't work, but I want to. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it. Unknown number, Chicago area code. She would have ignored it except it buzzed again immediately, which was the signal. A signal she had set up 3 years ago with a private investigator who monitored the perimeter of her life for exactly the kind of threat she had always known might come. She picked it up. Ms. Bennett. The voice on the other end was calm in the specific way of people trained to deliver bad news without inflection. We've identified 3 vehicles in the vicinity of the Callaway Tower. Korean nationals, no registered business in the city. One of them is running a plate that came up on our watch list in connection with the Jang Syndicate. The Jang Syndicate. She knew that name. She had done her research. She looked at Kong-jun across the table. How long have they been there? She said into the phone. First vehicle arrived 40 minutes ago. They don't appear to be connected to the Hasung security team. Understood. Thank you. She ended the call. The room felt different. She watched Kong-jun's face and saw the shift happen. The man who had been sitting with her in something almost resembling conversation was gone, replaced by something much older and much colder and much more dangerous, because he had heard enough of the call to understand what it meant, even if he hadn't heard the words. How many? He said. 3 vehicles. Jang. He was already on his feet. His phone was out. He was typing something. Not calling, typing, fast and specific. And his face had gone to a place she had seen it go once before and had hoped never to see again. They followed me, he said, not asking. Or they tracked the deal. Callaway Tower has been in acquisition news for 6 weeks. They know you're here. They know I exist. They may or may not know about... She stopped. They looked at each other. The children, he said. Her blood went cold in a way she had no metaphor for, in a way that was simply physical fact, the temperature of her body dropping by some unmeasurable amount, at the thought that had lived in the back of her mind for 5 years as a worst-case scenario and had just become a possibility in real time. Where are they right now? He said. School, 8 minutes from here. Security at the school. It's an elementary school, Kang-jun. Security at the school. She was already dialing Amara. 3 rings, 4. Pick up, she said quietly, and it was the first time her voice had done anything other than what she told it to do in the entire meeting, and she hated that, and she didn't care. Amara picked up on the 5th ring. Is everything okay? Zuri said. Yeah, I just dropped them off like 28. I need you to go back right now. Don't explain. Just go back to the school and stay with them until I get there. A pause. Amara had worked for her long enough. I'm already driving. She hung up. Kang-jun was on his own call now, rapid Korean, clipped and specific, and she caught fragments, positions, exits, the Korean word she knew for now. And she looked at him and said, We need to talk about what just changed. He ended his call. Everything just changed. Specifically, Jang doesn't send 3 vehicles to watch a building unless they intend to use them. They're not here for me alone. He looked at her. They know about the dead man's switch. That landed differently than she expected. How? Because I'm not the only person who's been looking for you. His voice was flat, controlled, and underneath the control, something she hadn't heard from him before, but not guilt, not the adjacent to guilt from the phone call last night. Something that sounded, in a way that made her want to sit down, like fear. Jang has been building a case against me for 3 years. If they found out you have documentation that could... They want the drive, she said. They want it destroyed, or they want it, depending on whether they think it exposes them as well. He met her eyes. You and your children are the only leverage anyone has ever had over me. And Jang just found out both facts at the same time. The room was very quiet. She had built a dead man's switch to protect herself from one man, and it had just made her and her children a target for another, and there was no contingency plan in the folder on her laptop, no legal strategy she had developed, no emergency protocol she had rehearsed that covered this specific configuration of disaster. She stood up. Tell me, she said, exactly what your team can do. And Kang-jun, the man who had put her in this position, the man she had built 5 years of armor against, the man who was also the father of 2 children 8 minutes away in an elementary school with no security detail, looked at her, and she watched him make the kind of decision that changes what a person is, the kind that costs something real. Everything, he said. They moved fast. Kangjun was already at the door when Zuri grabbed her portfolio and her phone and her coat in 3 separate motions that cost her maybe 4 seconds total, and she was behind him in the corridor before the conference room door had finished swinging. She had spent 5 years preparing for emergencies, and the preparation had become muscle memory. She didn't think about what to take. Her hands just knew. In the elevator, he was on his phone again. She listened to his Korean and understood fragments. North exit, 2 teams, confirmed the school address. And she pulled up Amara's contact and typed, "Do not leave the school with them under any circumstances. Wait inside. I'm coming. 3 dots. Then, okay, we're inside." She exhaled. "My car is in the garage on level 2, Kangjun said. He wasn't looking at his phone anymore. He was looking at the elevator doors. "We take mine." "My children are not getting into a car with your security team." "My security team is the only thing standing between your children and 3 vehicles of Zhang operatives. You don't know that they've moved on the school." "I don't know that they haven't." The elevator opened to the lobby. He walked and she walked beside him, not behind, and she was aware that this was the first time in 5 years she had moved through a space in physical proximity to him, and the awareness was irrelevant, and she made it irrelevant. "We take your car," she said. "I sit in the back with them. Your people stay in the front. If I say stop, we stop." "Agreed." "If I say get out, your people get out." "Agreed." "If anything, Zuri—" He stopped walking, just for a second, just long enough to look at her with something that was not patience. Patience was practiced. This was something different, something rawer. I know what the terms are. Can we move?" She moved. The school was a low brick building on a tree-lined street in Lincoln Square that Zuri had chosen specifically because of the neighborhood. Walkable, residential, the kind of street where strangers were noticed. She had walked the perimeter herself before enrolling the kids. She had timed the drive from her apartment. She had met both security guards at the front entrance and knew their names and their shifts. None of that felt like enough right now. Kangjun's car pulled up, black, armored. She noted the weight of the doors when Park opened one, and she got out before it had fully stopped moving, and she was at the school's front entrance in 11 steps, and she hit the buzzer and said her name and the door clicked open, and she was inside. Amara was in the main hallway with both children, sitting on the bench outside the main office, and the sight of them, Elias leaning against Amara's arm looking bored, Nyla with her backpack on her lap watching the door, hit Zuri somewhere that wasn't a thought, just a physical location in her chest that loosened the moment she saw them intact. "Mommy!" Nyla was up first. "Hey!" Zuri crouched and pulled both of them in and held them for a moment longer than she usually would. She felt Elias go still in the way he did when he sensed something was off. He had always been a child who read environments, who noticed when the adults were calibrating their voices. And she loosened her grip before he could ask. "We're going on a small trip," she said. "Okay? We're going to stay somewhere else tonight." "Where?" Elias asked. "Somewhere nice. Is it a hotel?" "Maybe." "Does it have a pool?" "Elias." "I'm just asking." She stood and looked at Amara, who had the face of someone who had spent 3 years working for Zuri and understood that this was the category of situation they did not discuss in front of the children. "You should go home," Zuri said. "Take a different route than usual. If anything feels wrong, call me." Amara nodded and didn't ask questions, which was one of the qualities Zuri valued most in any human being. She took both children's hands and walked them back to the entrance. Through the glass door, she could see the black car at the curb. She could see Kangjun standing beside it, hands in his coat pockets, looking at the school doors. Elias looked up. "That's the man from the floor," he said. "Yes." "Why is he here?" "He's helping us with the trip." Elias looked at her with the eyes she could not look at directly for too long. "Is he your friend?" The door was right there. All she had to do was push it open. "He's someone I'm working with," she said. "That's not the same as a friend." "No," she said. "It's not." She pushed the door open and walked them out. Kangjun looked at the children for the 3 seconds it took them to cross the sidewalk, and then he looked away. She noticed the deliberateness of it, the choice to not stare, to not impose. and she could see that it cost him something to make that choice, which was more self-awareness than she had credited him with. Nyla pressed herself against Zuri's side. Elias looked at the car with open interest. "Is that bulletproof?" Elias asked. Park, who was holding the rear door, looked straight ahead with military precision. "Get in," Zuri said. They got in. She got in after them. Kangjun took the front passenger seat without being asked, which was the right call, putting distance between himself and the children without making it look like distance, just practicality. And the car moved. Zuri pulled Nyla close and watched the street through the tinted windows and counted vehicles. Her investigator was already on the phone. She had texted him from the school hallway, and he confirmed 2 of the 3 original vehicles had moved from the Callaway vicinity. Direction unknown. "They're mobile," she said quietly. Kangjun half turned his head. "I know. My team has eyes on one of them, heading north." North was toward Lincoln Square, where they had just been. She put her arm around both children and said nothing and kept her face arranged into something that was not what she felt, which was the particular terror of understanding that you have been found not by one enemy, but by 2, and that the second one did not know about or care about your dead man's switch, and that the plans you made for one scenario do not automatically cover another. "Where are we going?" she said. "Safe house, west side. My team secured it 6 hours ago. You secured it before you knew about Zhang." "I secured it when I found out you were the lead executive on the Callaway deal." He paused. "I told you I'd been looking for you." She let that sit. She didn't have the capacity to be angry at him right now. Anger required a surplus of energy, and she was running on something considerably thinner. "Mommy," Nyla said quietly, "are we safe?" "Yes," Zuri said. "Promise?" She looked at her daughter's face, 5 years old and already asking for promises because she had been raised by a woman who was careful, and children absorb the texture of their parents' vigilance, whether you want them to or not. "I promise," she said, and meant it the way you mean things you will do everything in your power to make true. The safe house was a 3-story brownstone on a quiet street that looked residential from the outside and was not. The ground floor was 2 of Kangjun's team. The second floor had been arranged. She didn't want to think about how quickly, with actual furniture, actual beds, a kitchen with food in it. She got the children settled in the back bedroom with Nyla's tablet and Elias's absolute insistence that he was not tired and would not sleep, which would resolve itself in 20 minutes, as it always did. She stood in the hallway and listened until Elias's voice slowed and then stopped, and then she went downstairs. Kangjun was at the kitchen table with Park and another man she hadn't been introduced to, and the table had a laptop and a city map and 3 phones on it. She walked past all of it and filled a glass of water from the tap and drank half of it standing at the sink. "The 3rd vehicle," she said without turning around. "You said your team has eyes on one. What about the other 2? "One returned to the Callaway area. The 3rd we lost on the expressway." She set the glass down. "Lost. Temporarily. That's not a reassuring word." "No." She turned around. The other man at the table, not Park, younger, with the kind of stillness that came from training rather than temperament, was looking at his phone and not at her, which she appreciated. "I need to understand something," she said. She pulled out the chair across from Kangjun and sat. Not because she wanted to sit near him, but because this conversation needed to happen at eye level, and she was tired of being the person who stayed standing. "How did Zhang know about this documentation I have?" "I don't know that they do. I said it was possible." "You said they want the drive. That implies knowledge. It implies that they know you're a risk to me. That's enough for them to target you. They don't need to know the specifics." She thought about that. "How long has Zhang been building the case against you?" 3 years, maybe 4. "And in 4 years they never found me?" "No. But they found me now, within hours of you arriving in Chicago." He held her gaze. "Yes. Which means they followed you here. Or they've been monitoring the Callaway deal and they connected us through it. Either is possible. Which is more likely?" He was quiet for a moment. That was not hesitation. She knew the difference by now. It was genuine assessment. "The deal," he said. "I was careful coming into the country. My team swept for surveillance before we landed, but the Callaway acquisition has been in commercial real estate news. Your name has been in the filings. If Zhang has someone inside the US financial monitoring network, they found me through my own career, she said. Possibly. She sat with that. The particular irony of it, 5 years of building a legitimate life as a shield, and the legitimacy itself was the vector. She had made herself findable professionally, deliberately, because she had calculated that the professional visibility was a kind of protection. Visible people couldn't be made to disappear quietly. She had miscalculated what kind of threat would come. I need to make a call, she said. To your attorneys? Yes. It might be premature. It is never premature to notify the people holding my dead man's switch that circumstances have changed. She stood up. That's not a discussion. He didn't argue. She went to the corner of the kitchen and called the attorney in New York. Not the one in Chicago, the New York one, because she had never used them in sequence, always in alternation, keeping the pattern unpredictable, and she gave the update in the code they had agreed on, which sounded, to anyone listening, like a conversation about a commercial lease dispute. When she hung up, Kang Jun said, "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to ask it whether I say yes or not." "Fair." He looked at her. "The 2 years you spent building the documentation, were you hoping to use it against me specifically, or was it always about protection?" The question landed in a place she hadn't expected. She looked at him for a moment. "In the beginning," she said carefully, "I won't pretend there wasn't anger. The first year I was angry enough to, yes, I built it with anger. But anger is not a sustainable fuel, and I had 2 infants and no time for it. And by the second year, it was purely about protection. Purely about making sure that if you ever found us, we had leverage. Not to expose me. Not unless I had to." Something shifted in his face. "You could have." "I know. 3 years ago, 2 years ago, you had enough." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" She looked at her water glass on the counter. "Because I didn't want my children's father in prison. I wanted him to stay away from us. Those are different things." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the street made ordinary sounds. A car passing, distant voices, a dog somewhere. "Zuri!" Her phone screamed, not the regular ringtone, the alarm, the one she had set up with her investigator for a specific trigger, perimeter breach. The signal that someone had come within 2 blocks of a location her investigator was monitoring. The safe house address was not on that monitoring list. Her apartment was. "Someone's at my apartment," she said. Kang Jun was already on his feet. "They found your address." "My children's things are there, their documents. I have a lockbox. We're not going back." The lockbox has their passports, their birth certificates, everything I would need to She stopped, looked at him. "Everything is in that apartment. It's a trap." "You don't know that." "I know Zhang. Going back is what they want." He was already moving, saying something to Park in Korean, and Park was on the phone before Kang Jun had finished the sentence. "We need to move from here. If they found your apartment, they may have the safe house location within..." "How? How would they have this address?" He stopped. The room was very still. She watched him not answer for exactly 1 second too long, and in that second she understood something, and the understanding was cold and specific and arrived fully formed, the way the worst realizations always do. Kang Jun. "Zuri, how would they have this address?" Park had gone very still near the door. The younger man at the table was looking at his phone and not at either of them. And there was something wrong with his stillness, something that was not the stillness of a man following his employer's lead, but the stillness of a man waiting. "Who set up this safe house?" she said. Her voice was completely even. The evenness of a woman who has just understood that the threat was inside the car the whole time. "My team secured..." "Which member of your team?" Kang Jun turned to look at the young man at the table, and she watched Kang Jun's face do something she had never seen it do. Not the breaking open from the conference room, not the controlled recalibration she had catalogued 100 times. This was recognition of betrayal, which was different, which was a man looking at someone he had trusted and understanding in real time the full weight of his mistake. The young man's name, she would later learn, was Cho. He had been with Kang Jun for 2 years. He had been with Zhang for 4. Cho looked up from his phone. He looked at Kang Jun, and then he looked at Zuri, and his face was not apologetic or conflicted. It was the specific blankness of someone who has already made every decision they needed to make and is now simply waiting for events to catch up. "Don't," Kangjun said to him. Very quiet. Cho's hand went to his jacket. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds, and she would never be entirely sure of the sequence. Kangjun moved, not the controlled movement of a business meeting, not even the deliberate movement of a man who knew his security team was in position, but something faster and more animal, the movement of a man who spent years before the suits doing things she had always known about theoretically and never seen directly. He was across the table before Cho's hand cleared his jacket, and Park was moving from the door, and there was a sound. Not a gunshot, something else, something she identified a moment later as a phone hitting the floor. And then Kangjun had Cho against the wall with one forearm across his throat and the other hand controlling Cho's gun hand at the wrist. And the whole thing was over before she had processed that it had begun. She was standing exactly where she had been. She had not moved. Her body had made a different decision than her brain, which was, do not run, assess, stay between the door and yourself, understand the room. Kangjun said something in Korean. Low, controlled, the voice she associated with his worst moods, the ones that never showed on his face. Cho said something back, short. What did he say? Zuri said. Kangjun didn't answer immediately. He was looking at Cho with something that might have been the closest emotion to grief that his face was capable of. And then it wasn't, and the professional coldness came back in the way she had once found fascinating and now found frightening. He said they already have everything they need, Kangjun said. He said the documentation doesn't matter anymore because they found the attorneys. She heard the words. She processed them. She understood them. All 3, she said. It was not a question. He doesn't know how many. He says Zhang's people have been working the network for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The entire time the Callaway acquisition had been in the news. While she had been preparing presentations and managing Marcus and putting her children to bed and believing that her dead man's switch was the most sophisticated protection she had ever built, someone had been methodically dismantling the architecture of it from the outside. And she had not known. And she had not known because she had been watching for Kangjun and not for anyone else. If they have the attorneys, she said, the switch is compromised. Which means I have no leverage. Which means, Kangjun said, and he was looking at her now over Cho's pinned shoulder with an expression she could not read and a voice she could barely hear, that the only thing standing between you and whatever Zhang decides to do next is me. The man who had told her to get rid of it. The man she had built 5 years of protection specifically against needing. The man whose children were asleep upstairs in a safe house that was no longer safe, in a city where her apartment had just been breached, with a dead man's switch that had just been rendered inoperable by people who had been working the problem longer than she had. She looked at Kangjun. She looked at the man pinned against the wall who had betrayed them both. She looked at the door, which Park was now standing in front of, and she thought about the stairs and the bedroom at the top of the stairs, and Elias who would be asleep by now with his arm thrown over his face the way he slept, and Nyla who slept so still she sometimes scared Zuri when she checked on her. How long do we have? She said. Minutes, maybe less. What do we do? And Kangjun, the man she had needed to need nothing from, the man she had built her entire architecture around, not depending on, looked at her with the first completely unguarded expression she had seen from him in 5 years. Something that was not control and not authority, and not the specific coldness of a man who had made himself unreachable, but something much older and much simpler than any of that. We get the children and we run, he said, and then you let me do what I know how to do. She was already moving toward the stairs when the first window on the ground floor exploded inward, and the sound of it brought Nyla's scream from the bedroom above, and Zuri took the stairs 3 at a time, with her heart in her throat and the full weight of understanding that every plan she had ever made had just been rendered useless, and the only thing left was what came next. Nyla was still screaming when Zuri hit the top of the stairs. Not the sustained scream of a child in pain, the sharp, cut-off scream of a child who heard something terrifying and then went silent, which was worse, because silence meant she was assessing, meant she was doing the thing Zuri had inadvertently trained her to do, which was go quiet and still when something was wrong. Zuri hit the bedroom door with her shoulder, and it swung open and both children were on the bed. Elias awake now, sitting up with wide eyes, and his jaw set in the stubborn line that meant he was frightened and refusing to show it, Nyla pressed into the corner between the headboard and the wall with her knees pulled up, both of them intact, both of them present, and Zuri's body processed this information before her brain did, and she was across the room in 4 steps. "Listen to me," she said. She was crouching in front of both of them, hands on both of their faces, making them look at her. "We need to leave right now. We're going to walk fast and stay together, and you are going to hold my hands and not let go. Do you understand me?" Elias nodded. His jaw was still set. Nyla said, "What broke?" "The window downstairs. It's okay. We're going." "Why did the window Nyla, do you understand what I said?" Nyla's eyes were enormous and her hands were shaking, and she nodded, and that was enough. Zuri picked Nyla up. 52 pounds. She knew her daughter's weight, the way she knew her own heartbeat, and took Elias's hand and turned, and Kongjun was in the doorway. He had a gun. She had known, abstractly, that he would have a gun. Seeing it was different from knowing it. He was holding it low, barrel toward the floor, and he was looking at her with the specific compressed urgency of a man who had approximately 30 seconds to communicate a situation that required 3 minutes to explain. "Back staircase," he said. "Park is holding the ground floor. We have maybe 90 seconds before they breach the back." "How many?" "At least 6, possibly more in the vehicle." "Cho?" "Contained." She didn't ask what contained meant. She walked past him into the hallway and he fell into step behind her, and she found the back staircase. Narrower, steeper, the kind of stairs that existed in old Chicago brownstones and were an afterthought. And she started down with Nyla against her chest, and Elias's hand locked in hers, and she did not look back. Halfway down she heard it. Not the explosion of the window, that had already happened, but the specific sound of the back door giving way. Wood and metal, and the particular sound of a frame that had held for 90 years failing in under a second. She stopped. Kongjun's hand found her shoulder from behind. "Left," he said against her ear. "Second door." She turned left at the bottom of the staircase into a utility corridor she hadn't known existed, because of course she hadn't known. She hadn't secured this building, and the fact that she was now dependent on information she hadn't gathered herself was the specific failure she had spent 5 years trying to make impossible. Second door. She pushed it open and it was a laundry room. Industrial washer, water heater, one small window near the ceiling that was barely a foot wide and was their exit, apparently. And she almost said, "You're not serious," but Kongjun was already moving, was already dragging the washer out from the wall to stand on. And the sounds from the kitchen at the front of the basement were close now, voices in Korean, and Elias was making a sound that was not quite crying and not quite not, a tight, controlled sound that broke something in her chest. "She goes first," Zuri said, meaning Nyla. "She goes first," Kongjun agreed, already there. She passed Nyla to him without letting herself think about it, passed her daughter to this man, for the first time in 5 years, physical transfer of her child into his hands, and watched him lift Nyla toward the window with a steadiness that had no performance in it. And Nyla, who was 5 years old and afraid and shaking, grabbed the window ledge when he told her to, and pulled herself through with a determination that made Zuri's eyes burn briefly, and then not. Elias went next, with less grace and more aggression, elbowing the window frame on the way through and biting back whatever sound that produced. Zuri went next. It was tight. The frame caught her hips, and she had a moment of completely absurd panic. This is how it ends, stuck in a basement window while armed men come through the door. And then she was through, sprawling onto the concrete of the building's rear well, catching herself on her hands, gravel opening the skin of her palms. She had her children's arms before she was fully upright. She pulled them back against the building wall, and she was shaking. She registered it, and noted it, and set it aside. And she looked up, and Kongjun was coming through the window, and he was broader than her, and it was slower, and from inside the laundry room she could hear the door to the corridor being tried. "Move," she said to the kids, and she moved them, keeping them against the wall, toward the building's back corner. And she heard Kongjun hit the ground behind her, and then he was beside her in 2 strides. The alley behind the brownstone was narrow and dark, and connected to a street on both ends. She could see the glow of the cross-street lights on her left. She had no information about what was waiting out there. "Street," Kongjun said. "Left, my second team." "You had a second team?" "I always have a second team." They moved. She kept Nyla pressed against her and Elias's hand so tight she felt his fingers compress, and she didn't loosen her grip, and he didn't complain, and they moved down the alley at something between a fast walk and a run, the pace calibrated to what her daughter's legs could manage, and Kang Jun was behind them with the gun no longer pointed at the floor. She heard the window blow out above them. Not a shot, a fist through glass, someone coming through where they'd just been. And she didn't look back, and she didn't slow down, and she kept her children moving, and the end of the alley appeared, and a car was there, black, engine running, and she pulled the rear door open and pushed both children in and got in after them, and the door was closed before Kang Jun had the front passenger door fully open. The car moved. Nyla was sobbing quietly against Zuri's side. Elias was silent with his arms wrapped around his own knees, looking at his shoes. Zuri put both arms around both of them and said nothing, and the car turned out of the alley onto the lit street, and she watched the brownstone disappear in the rear window. Her palms were bleeding. She noticed this distantly. The gravel had done more damage than she'd registered in the moment. She pressed both hands together and focused on the pressure. "Where?" she said. "Callaway?" Kang Jun said from the front. "The building we just came from. The building I own the acquisition rights to, which means I have access to every floor and every system, and which my team has been running security on for 6 hours. It is the most defensible position in this city that I currently control. They know we were there. They know it was a meeting location. They don't know I've secured it." "You secured it this morning?" "Yesterday." She absorbed this.
"Before you knew about Zhang?" "Before I knew about Zhang, yes." She looked at the back of his head. 5 years ago, she had found it maddening that he prepared for contingencies she hadn't imagined. She had a more complicated relationship with that quality right now. Elias said very quietly, "Are those men going to find us?" The car was quiet for a moment. "No," Kang Jun said. From the front seat, not turning around. Firm, not gentle. She would not have believed gentle from him, and Elias would not have either. Just certain, the way Kang Jun was certain about things, with the full weight of a man who intended to make the statement true. Elias looked at the back of Kang Jun's head for a moment. Then he looked at his shoes again. "Okay," Elias said. The Callaway Tower lobby at 11:47 at night was empty and echoing, and the security desk had 2 of Kang Jun's men behind it, who had presumably relieved whoever the building's regular overnight staff were, by means she didn't ask about. The lobby lights were on but low. The marble floor reflected their footsteps back at them. Nyla had stopped crying. She was in that specific post-crying state of exhaustion that children hit like a wall, limp, heavy-eyed, still catching her breath on the inhale. Zuri was carrying her again. Her arms ached. She was not going to put her down. Elias was walking beside her with one hand holding the hem of her coat, which was how he had walked with her when he was 3, and which he had mostly grown out of, and the return of it did the specific thing to her chest that she had been suppressing for 45 minutes now. Kang Jun moved them to the service elevator, faster, off the main floor, the kind of elevator that required a key. He had the key. He used it. They went up. 38. The conference suite. He had people there, two of his team she hadn't seen before, both armed, both carrying themselves with the practiced stillness of men who knew exactly where they were positioned in the room's threat geometry. "Clear," Kang Jun said. 3 vehicles on Wacker, one of the men said. "Could be Zhang, could be traffic. Watch them. If they move toward the building." "Understood." Zuri carried Nyla to the far side of the conference suite, to a cluster of chairs away from the windows, and sat with her daughter in her lap and Elias pressed against her side, and she looked at the city spread out through the glass. Chicago at midnight, lit and enormous and indifferent. And she let herself have 30 seconds of not strategizing, just 30. Just long enough to feel the weight of her daughter and the warmth of her son's shoulder against her arm and the reality of their breathing, which was the most important information available. Then she looked up and found Kang Jun watching her from across the room. He looked away first, this time. "I need to call the FBI," she said. It was 12:15. The children were asleep in the inner office. She had made them a nest from the conference room's extra chairs and Kang Jun's coat and her own blazer. And she and Kang Jun were at the conference table, and the city below had not done anything alarming in the last 27 minutes, which was either good
or the specific calm she didn't trust. Not yet, he said. The dead man's switch is compromised. I have no leverage. My apartment has been breached. 2 of my children were just chased through a basement window at midnight. What is your argument against calling the FBI? That calling the FBI tonight alerts Zhang that we've gone to federal authorities, which tells them exactly how much time they have left to operate before a federal umbrella goes up, and they will use that time. She looked at him. To do what? To do whatever they came to Chicago to do, as fast as possible, before they have to pull out. He held her gaze. Zhang has survived 4 federal investigations. They know how to move inside the window between the call and the response. So you're saying federal involvement makes it more dangerous in the short term? I'm saying it makes it more dangerous in the next 8 hours. After that, yes, federal involvement is the right move, but we need to survive the next 8 hours first. She pressed her fingertips against the table. Her palms had been cleaned. One of Kong Jun's team, wordlessly, had produced a first aid kit at some point in the last hour, and she had used it while he wasn't looking because she didn't want to do it while he was watching. The cuts were shallow. They stung. What do you propose for the next 8 hours? She said. I have 3 assets in this city that Zhang doesn't know about. People, not locations. Former colleagues who left the network on good terms 3 years ago when I started. He stopped. When you started what? He was quiet for a moment. When I started building an exit. She hadn't expected that. She held very still. You were building an exit. For 3 years. From the syndicate. Yes. She looked at him. She looked at him the way she hadn't let herself look at him all day. Directly, without the professional filter, without the protective calculation. Why? He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the table, and then at the city, and then at the door to the inner office where the children were sleeping, and she watched him decide something. Because I spent a year after you left trying to find you, he said. And then I spent another year understanding why I couldn't. And then I spent a year understanding what kind of man makes the choice I made in that penthouse. He paused. I didn't like the answer. The room was very quiet. The exit takes time, he said. You can't walk away from what I built without bringing the whole structure down on your head. I've been dismantling from the inside, carefully. Creating documentation that would be useful to federal authorities, cutting the revenue lines one at a time. He looked at her. The encrypted drive I mentioned in Seoul, the one I was eventually going to use to approach federal prosecutors. I brought it with me to Chicago. I was going to contact the FBI's Organized Crime Division next week. She stared at him. You were going to make a deal. I was going to make a deal. And Zhang? Zhang has been watching my business behavior change for 2 years. They've been waiting for confirmation that I'm turning. I think you were it. I think following my movements to Chicago and finding you was the confirmation they needed that I was serious about getting out. Because you'd spent years looking for the woman you... She stopped herself. Because my existence suggested you had reasons to want a different life. Yes. She sat with that. All of it. The architecture of the last 5 years and what it looked like from a different angle than the one she'd been standing in. You should have told me, she said. This morning, you should have... I know. You had information that was directly relevant to the threat level I was operating under, and you didn't... I know. I was... He stopped, started again. I was trying to figure out how to tell you that I had been building an exit for 3 years without it sounding like a bid for forgiveness. Because it wasn't. It has nothing to do with forgiveness. I don't expect that. Then what do you expect? Tonight? I expect to get my children out of a building that Zhang is going to attack before morning. The word my landed in the room and sat there, and neither of them addressed it. Tell me about the 3 assets, she said. His name for the first one was a working name. He called her Shin, and she was apparently a former logistics coordinator who had left the network with detailed knowledge of Zhang's Chicago operations, which existed because Zhang had been expanding into North American territory for 4 years. Shin had a location for Zhang's operational hub in the city, a warehouse on the near west side. If we know where they're running from, Kong Jun said, we have something to trade with federal authorities. Not just my documentation, a live operational hub. That's your play. You're going to offer the FBI Zhang in exchange for yourself. I'm going to offer the FBI Zhang and my own complete cooperation. Every account, every name, every operation I've been documenting for 3 years. In exchange for immunity for myself and protection for you and the children. She looked at him. Full immunity? Negotiated, likely partial. I'll lose the assets, most of them. The legitimate real estate portfolio may survive partially. I'll have restrictions. Monitoring. He paused. I won't have the syndicate. You're prepared for that. I've been prepared for that for 3 years. She looked at her hands. The cuts from the gravel. The specific ache of her arms from carrying Nyla. The tiredness that had settled into a place behind her eyes that was not the tiredness of a single bad night, but the cumulative tiredness of 5 years. If we make it to morning, she said. Yes. And between now and morning, we need to hold this building. As if in response to the word hold, one of the team members near the window said flatly, They're moving. It started on the ground floor. Not the front entrance. She'd expected the front, they all had. The main lobby with its marble and its high ceilings and the vulnerability of all that glass. It was the parking structure, the connected parking structure on the building's south face that shared a basement level with the tower, and which Kong Jun's team had secured but which Zhang had apparently spent the last 4 hours finding the weak point in. She heard it as a sound that traveled up through 40 floors of steel and concrete and still arrived as something definite, not an explosion, more like a pressure shift, like the building had absorbed something and was still processing it. Then the radio in the hand of the team member near the door crackled and said something in Korean that made Kong Jun stand up fast. Basement breach, he said. Parking level 2. How many of your team are in the building? 6, plus us. Against how many of theirs? Unknown. He was moving toward the inner office. Wake the children. And take them where? Up. There's a mechanical level above us, 39. My team secured a position there 2 hours ago. You prepared a fallback position. I always prepare a fallback position. She was already at the inner office door. She went in and crouched beside the chair nest and put her hand on Elias first. His shoulder, firm, the way she woke him when she meant it, and said, Up, now. And watched him go from asleep to sitting in under 2 seconds, which was the thing about her son that was both remarkable and heartbreaking. Nyla was harder. Nyla went through a layer of confused crying before she was properly awake, and Zuri held her face and said, Look at me, look at mommy. We're okay. We're moving. Hold on to me. And Nyla's eyes focused, and she reached up and grabbed Zuri's collar with both hands, which was as close to ready as she was going to get. Kong Jun was in the doorway. He looked at the children for exactly 1 second with an expression that had no professional calculation in it at all, and then he looked at Zuri and said, Stairs. I'll be behind you. She went. The stairwell to 39 was a maintenance staircase, narrower than the main, and she took it with Nyla against her chest and Elias 2 steps ahead of her because he was faster, and she needed to see him, needed to keep his moving body in her sightline, and she heard Kong Jun behind her and the sound of the radio going quiet in the way that meant the team below had stopped transmitting, which was either tactical silence or something worse. 39 was mechanical space, low ceilings, the hum of HVAC systems, catwalks over the elevator shafts, the kind of floor that wasn't on any tenant map. It smelled like machine oil and recycled air. 2 of Kong Jun's team were already there, positioned at the 2 entry points, and they acknowledged him without speaking. She found a corner of the catwalk between 2 large duct housings, put Nyla down, and crouched in front of both children. Stay here, she said. Right here. Don't move. You understand? Elias's jaw was doing the thing. What if something happens to you? Nothing is going to happen to me. But what if... Elias... She held his eyes. Do you trust me? He looked at her for a moment with those eyes. Yes. Then stay here. She stood and moved to where Kong Jun was talking low and fast with his team, and she put herself close enough to hear because she was not going to stand in a corner and wait for information. 2 of his 6 building team were not responding to radio contact, ground floor and parking level. The breach team had moved to the elevator shafts. Zhang knew, apparently, that they were somewhere in the upper floors, and they were coming up. Service elevator shaft, Kong Jun's team member said. They're in it. Maybe 12 floors down. How many? We heard 4 sets of movement. Could be more. Kong Jun looked at her. She looked back. The drive, she said. Your encrypted drive. Where is it? He touched his jacket, inside pocket. Why? Because if something happens to you in the next hour, I need to be able to walk out of here with it and the children and go directly to federal authorities and make your deal for you. He stared at her. I'm not being sentimental, she said. I'm being practical. If you're the only person who knows what's on it and you're not available, we lose all leverage. He reached into his jacket and held the drive out. Flat, small, black, about the size of a thumb. She took it and put it in her bra, the most secure location available. And Kang Jun watched her do this with an expression she didn't have time to interpret. The password, she said. He told her. 8 characters, not obvious, not her name or the children's. Something else, something from a time she didn't know about. She memorized it in one pass. The FBI contact, she said. Special Agent Reyes, Dana Reyes, Chicago Field Office. She's been building the case against my network for 2 years. She'll know who I am. And she'll make the deal. She wants the network more than she wants me. From somewhere below them, not 12 floors now, closer, maybe 8, came a sound that traveled through the elevator shaft in the mechanical space and arrived as a vibration more than a sound, the specific vibration of something large moving through an enclosed metal space. One of the team members said something sharp. Kang Jun was already moving, pulling her back by the arm toward the duct housing where the children were, and she went because there wasn't time not to, and she got to them. Elias standing now, Nyla still crouched but with her eyes huge and alert, and she put herself in front of both of them. Down, she said to the children, and they went down, and she crouched over them. Kang Jun positioned himself to her left, between their position and the elevator shaft access. The 2 team members were at the access door. The third was at the staircase. The radio crackled once, said one word in Korean. What? Zuri said. Staircase 2, Kang Jun said. They split. 4 coming through the elevator shaft access. Unknown number coming up the staircase. 6 total defenders, including Kang Jun, 2 of whom were his team members and 4 of whom were unavailable or down. The math was bad, and she had always been good at math. She looked around the mechanical floor, HVAC housing, catwalks, the elevator shaft access in front of them, the staircase door to the right. The ceiling was low. The sight lines were poor. It was, she understood, not a good place to be surrounded. It was also, she realized, looking at the HVAC housing and the catwalks and the elevator shaft access, not without options. She had spent 5 years in commercial real estate. She knew buildings. She knew what the HVAC system on a 39-story tower was responsible for. Air pressure, temperature, the ductwork that connected every floor. She knew what happened to that system when you modified its inputs. The HVAC controls, she said. Where are they? Kang Jun looked at her. What? The mechanical controls for the air handling system. This floor. Where? He looked at his team member, who pointed. Across the catwalk on the far wall, a control panel, industrial, the kind of thing that managed airflow for 40 stories. The elevator shaft, she said. It's ventilated by the HVAC. If I reverse the airflow on the shaft section, push pressure up instead of pulling it down, it creates resistance. It won't stop them, but it will slow them, and it will make noise. Noise we don't want. Noise that sounds like a mechanical failure. Noise that makes them hesitate because they can't tell if something's wrong with the shaft. She looked at him. 30 seconds. 40. Enough for your team to get into position. He looked at the control panel. Looked at her. Do you know how to operate industrial HVAC controls? I have inspected 47 commercial properties in 5 years and I am very thorough. Something crossed his face. Not a smile, not quite, but in the vicinity. Go. She went. She went across the catwalk in a crouch, with her bleeding palms on the metal railing, and she reached the panel. And it was a Carrier industrial system, older than she'd have liked, but the interface was standard, and she found the shaft zone controls in under 15 seconds and reversed the airflow on the south shaft section, and the result was immediate. A rising pressure sound from the shaft that was functional and alarming and sounded if you were climbing through it and didn't know what had changed, like a system failure. She heard the movement in the shaft hesitate. She looked back across the catwalk. Kang Jun's 2 team members had moved to the shaft access door. Kang Jun himself was at the staircase door, braced, and she understood that the 30 seconds she had bought was being used and was almost gone. The staircase door blew open. 3 men, moving fast, 2 of them with weapons she could see and one behind. She registered this in a fractional second from across the catwalk. And then she was flat on the catwalk because Kongjun was already engaging and the noise was enormous. The space amplified everything, and she put her hands over her ears by instinct and then took them off because she needed to hear. Elias was shouting something. She couldn't hear it. She turned and he was still in position, still down, with his arm over Nyla's head, pressing his sister down and covering her with his own body, and the specific small heroism of it, her 5-year-old son putting himself over his sister in the dark, cracked something open in her that she could not afford right now. "Stay!" she shouted at him. He looked at her from across the catwalk with his father's eyes and didn't move. The shaft access door was buckling. The pressure reversal she'd created was not going to hold against a human body with enough motivation. She looked at the control panel and she thought, and she found the ventilation zone for floors 30 through 38, the floors below them, and she pushed the intake to maximum, which would create a down pressure on those floors significant enough to make anyone in an enclosed space below feel it. And if any of Zhang's people were clearing those floors, if they were using them as staging, it wouldn't hurt them, but it would confuse the environment enough to... The shaft access door gave. 2 men threw it simultaneously, which told her they were trained. You don't send 2 through a door at once unless you know the formation, unless you've practiced the entry. And Kongjun's 2 team members engaged them, and the mechanical level became something she had no clean words for, just noise and movement, and the specific controlled chaos of people fighting in an enclosed space with bad sightlines. She crossed the catwalk. Back to the children. She got to them, and she pulled Elias up by the arm and said, "We move on my word." And he said, "Where?" And she said, "When I say." She was watching Kongjun. He had taken one of the staircase attackers down. She didn't look at how, and was engaged with the second, and there was something wrong with his left arm, something in the way he was holding it, but he wasn't stopping. And the 2 team members at the shaft were still holding but barely, and the 3rd team member who'd been at the staircase was down, which meant the staircase was now open behind them. "Word," Zuri said. She grabbed Nyla with one arm and Elias's hand with the other, and she moved, not back to the staircase, toward the elevator's shaft access, toward the fighting, which was counterintuitive, which was why it was the only option, because Zhang's people were coming from the shaft and the staircase, and the only direction that wasn't already compromised was through the space they'd come from. Kongjun saw her moving and understood in less than a second. She watched him understand, watched him position himself, and he was between her and the 2 remaining shaft attackers. And she moved through the gap he made and hit the staircase door and went through it with both children, down, 1 floor, the 38th, conference suite, back to where they'd started, which felt like a cruel geometry. And she stopped inside the conference suite door and pressed herself against the wall and breathed and listened. Kongjun came through the door 15 seconds later. He was breathing hard. She had not heard him breathe hard before, in any circumstance, and the sound of it told her something about how bad it was. His left hand was pressed against his side under his jacket. Dark fabric, dark stain, not visible unless you were looking, and she was looking. "You're hit," she said. "It's manageable." Kongjun, "It is manageable." He met her eyes. "Where's the 2nd team member?" "I don't know. I lost track when..." The conference suite's main door opened, not from the elevator, not from the staircase she'd come through. From the corridor, the main corridor, which meant someone had come from the elevators on the far side, and she had made an error, had not accounted for them coming around, and the person in the doorway was not Zhang. Park, who had been on the ground floor when the breach started, who Kongjun had said was holding the ground floor, who was now on the 38th looking at them with an expression that didn't have the specific quality of a man who had fought his way up here and was exhausted, who had the specific quality of a man who had walked. Kongjun went very still. "Park," he said. Park was on the phone. He said something in Korean into it and ended the call and looked at Kongjun with the expression of a man who had also made all his decisions and was on the other side of them now. "How long?" Kongjun said. 18 months, Park said, in English, which told her it was for her benefit. "I'm sorry, Kongjun." The room was very quiet. Zuri had both children behind her. Kongjun was bleeding into his jacket and standing between her and his security chief of 7 years, who was the second mole, who had been the one to sell the safe house address. who had been the one to confirm their location to Jiang's team, and the whole beautiful, catastrophic architecture of the last 18 hours rearranged itself in her head into its true shape. "The children," Kang Jun said. His voice had no inflection. "Jiang wants the drive," Park said. "Give me the drive, and the kids don't factor." "They were never going to just want the drive," Kang Jun said. "No," Park said. "They weren't." And in her pocket, in the place against her sternum, where she had put it 40 minutes ago on a catwalk, the encrypted drive that contained everything that could end this pressed against her skin like a coal, and the man who had spent 7 years being Kang Jun's most trusted operative raised his weapon and pointed it at the father of her children, and Kang Jun did not move, and she understood with absolute cold clarity that he was not going to move, that he was standing exactly where he was standing, because moving would require stepping away from the line between her and Park, and he was not going to do that. "Don't," she said. Both men looked at her. She reached into her jacket. Not for the drive. Her jacket didn't have a pocket position that way. She'd put it elsewhere. She was not going to tell them where, but she reached into the breast pocket of her blazer and removed her phone, and she held it up so they could both see the screen. Dana Reyes, Chicago FBI. She'd searched the name while Kang Jun was briefing his team 20 minutes ago. She had the number. Her thumb was on the call button. "If I make this call," she said, "they have a location and a building name and the name Jiang within 60 seconds. Whatever window your people think they have closes immediately. Whoever is still in this building when federal agents arrive," she looked at Park, "is arrested in this building, along with the 3 vehicles outside." Park's expression shifted, just slightly. "She'll do it," Kang Jun said. Not to her, to Park. "You know she'll do it." The gun was still up. Park looked between them. She watched him do the calculation, the same calculation she'd been doing all night, the risk-reward, the variable she hadn't accounted for. And she kept her face completely still and her thumb on the call button, and she did not let herself look at Kang Jun, because if she looked at Kang Jun right now, she would see the wound in his side, and she could not afford what that would do to her ability to keep her face still. Park's weapon hand dropped 2 inches. Not a surrender. An opening. Kang Jun took it. What happened next was fast and brutal, and she turned her body to put herself between it and the children, and she pressed Elias and Nyla into the corner behind her, and she kept her hand on Elias's head, and she felt him trembling, actually trembling, her solid, stubborn, fearless boy. And she held him and didn't look until the sound stopped. When she looked, Park was on the floor not moving, and Kang Jun was on one knee beside him, and his hand was pressed hard against his own side again, and his breathing was audible across the room. She was calling Reyes before she'd finished the thought. The phone rang twice. "Reyes." "My name is Zuri Bennett," she said. "I'm in the Callaway Tower on Wacker Drive with Seo Kang Jun. He has a drive for you. We need extraction and medical, in that order. Jiang Syndicate operatives, multiple, in and around the building. Do you know who I'm talking about?" A beat. "I know who you're talking about. How fast can you move? How bad is the situation in the building?" She looked at Kang Jun, who was still on one knee, and was looking at her with the expression of a man who had been making himself impossible to reach for 30 years and had run out of resources to maintain it. "It's been worse," she said, "but not recently." 12 minutes, Reyes said. "We'll be here." She ended the call. She looked at the children. Nyla had her face pressed against Zuri's back. Elias was watching Kang Jun with the careful attention he gave to things he was trying to understand, and then she crossed the room to where Kang Jun was kneeling, and she crouched beside him and said, "Let me see." Let me see." He moved his hand. She looked at what was there, and then she took off her blazer and pressed it against his side with both hands, and she held it there and she looked at him, and he looked back at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Elias's voice came from the corner, very clear, very deliberate, in the specific tone he used when he had decided something was true. "I think he's our dad." The room was completely silent. Zuri did not take her eyes off Kang Jun's face. She watched something move through him that had no name and no containment and no wall strong enough to hold it, and she kept both hands pressed against his side, and she held his gaze and she said quietly to her son, "Yeah." Elias was quiet for a moment. Then, "He's hurt." "I know." "Is he going to be okay?" She looked at the man in front of her, the man who had broken her apart and inadvertently built her into something much harder and more capable than she'd been before. The man who had spent 3 years trying to become someone worth returning to, without knowing if there was anything to return to. The man who had stood between her and a gun without moving his feet. Yes, she said. The 12 minutes felt like a different kind of time, not slow exactly. She had experienced slow in the last several hours, the specific elongation of seconds when your body is running on adrenaline and every detail sharpens into something almost painful. This was different. This was the time after the worst of it, when the shaking starts because the body finally understands it has survived. And the understanding is not relief so much as a kind of bewildered accounting. She was still pressing her blazer against Kang Jun's side. Her arms were tired. Her palms burned where the gravel had opened them. Elias had come out of the corner and was sitting 3 feet away on the carpet, watching Kang Jun with the unblinking focus he brought to things he had decided to understand. And Nyla had her face pressed against Zuri's back with both arms around her waist, and none of them were talking. Kang Jun was looking at the ceiling. His breathing had steadied. She could feel it through her hands, the rise and fall, slower than it had been. He had said twice that it wasn't bad, and she had ignored him both times because she could see it, and she had a working understanding of what bad looked like. "You should lie down," she said. "I'm fine." "You're on one knee on a conference room floor. It's a choice. It's a bad choice." He lowered himself slowly, with the careful movement of a man who understood that speed would cost him, until he was sitting on the carpet with his back against the base of the conference table. She kept the blazer in place. He put his own hand over hers to hold it, which was a practical decision, and she was aware of his hand over her hand, and she noted it, and she did not move. Elias said, "Does it hurt?" Kang Jun looked at him. "Yes," he said. Elias absorbed this. "My teacher says it's okay to cry when something hurts. Your teacher is right. Are you going to cry?" "No? How come?" Kang Jun looked at him for a moment with something she couldn't categorize. Not the broken open expression from the conference room, not the controlled professional mask, something that was trying to be both and managing neither, something that was simply a man looking at his son for the first time with nothing left to hide behind. "I'm not sure I remember how," he said. Elias considered this with the seriousness he brought to most things. "I can teach you," he said. "It's not that hard." Something happened at the corner of Kang Jun's mouth. Not a smile, not quite, but the shape that a smile might eventually grow from if given enough time and the right conditions. "Maybe," he said. Nyla peeled herself away from Zuri's back and moved around to look at Kang Jun from a safe distance, 3 feet, which was Nyla's standard assessment range for new things. She studied him the way she studied everything, thorough, unhurried, giving nothing away about her conclusions. "You fell down on the floor," she said, "at the meeting." "I did." "Because you were surprised." "Yes." "Mommy said." She tilted her head. "What were you surprised about?" Kang Jun looked at Nyla for a long moment. "You," he said. "Both of you." "Why?" "Because I didn't know you existed, and then I did." Nyla processed this. "We've existed for 5 years," she said, with the mild reproach of someone correcting an obvious factual error. "I know," he said. "That's my fault." Nyla looked at him for another moment. Then she sat down on the carpet approximately 2.5 feet away from him, closer than 3 feet, which was something, and put her chin in her hands and kept looking at him with the unhurried patience of a child who had decided she was not done assessing. Zuri watched all of this and kept both hands on the blazer and did not say anything. Ochek. Reyes came in 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Zuri knew because she'd been counting. The federal agents came through the main conference suite entrance with weapons drawn and in the specific organized chaos of a team that had been briefed on the way up, and there were also paramedics, which she had not expected and was enormously grateful for. And the next 20 minutes were the kind of controlled disorder that she navigated by focusing on the children, keeping them in her peripheral vision, keeping them close, answering their questions in short factual sentences that didn't include the words danger or hurt or scared. Special Agent Dana Reyes was a small Puerto Rican woman in her early 40s with close-cropped hair and the specific tired competence of someone who had been working the same case for 2 years and had just watched it break open in a way she hadn't planned for. She found Zuri while the paramedics were working on Kongjun. He was conscious, arguing with the paramedics about the degree of intervention required, which she took as a positive sign. And she said without preamble, "You're Bennett." "Yes." "He called you from a soul number 6 weeks ago." Not a question. 9:47 on a Tuesday. Yes. Reyes looked at her with the evaluative quality of someone recalibrating and understanding. "He told me he'd been building a case for 3 years. He said there was a woman who also had documentation, but that he'd lost contact with her." A beat. "He didn't say you had children." "He didn't know until yesterday." Reyes absorbed this with the stillness of a professional. The drive. Zuri reached into her blazer, the blazer she'd retrieved from Kang Jun's side when the paramedics took over, blood-stained now along the edge, which she registered and set aside, and removed the drive and held it out. Reyes took it. She looked at it, and then at Zuri. "Password?" "That's his to give," Zuri said, "when he's conscious and has an attorney present." Something moved in Reyes's face that was either irritation or respect, possibly both. "Fair," she said. "I also have documentation of my own," Zuri said. "Financial records connected to Hasung Global and its parent holding companies. 3 attorneys who were holding it were compromised. I'll need to verify the extent of that compromise and potentially rebuild the evidentiary chain. I'll cooperate fully with federal investigators, but I need guarantees about my children's security, and I need them in writing before I hand over anything." Reyes looked at her for a moment. "You're not a lawyer." "No, but I've been preparing for this conversation for 3 years." "I can tell." Reyes put the drive in her jacket pocket. "We'll talk tomorrow. Tonight I need the building, and I need your statement. My children need to sleep somewhere that isn't a crime scene. We can arrange that. Arrange it first. Then you get my statement." Reyes looked at her for another moment, and then she almost smiled. Not quite, the restraint of a professional, but the shape of it was there. "Okay, Ms. Bennett," she said. "We'll arrange it first." They took Kongjun to Northwestern Memorial. The wound was a through and through on the left side, below the ribs. She overheard this and processed it clinically, the way she processed things when she needed them, not to touch her yet. The paramedic said clean exit, no organ involvement, which she understood to mean he would be uncomfortable for several weeks and functional eventually, which was the best available category of outcome. She and the children went to a federal safe house on the north side, a different kind of safe house than the brownstone, one with actual protocols and an agent in the hallway who had a name and showed her a badge when she asked for it. The apartment had 2 bedrooms and a kitchen stocked with the specific generic provisions of a government purchasing decision. Peanut butter, crackers, juice boxes, the kind of cereal Elias liked and the kind Nyla didn't. She got them bathed and into clean clothes from the go bag the agents had retrieved from her apartment. She had maintained a go bag for 4 years, a habit she had hoped to eventually find unnecessary. And she got them into the same bed because neither of them was going to sleep alone tonight, and she knew better than to try. And she sat on the edge of the bed and she answered questions until the questions slowed and then stopped. Nyla was asleep first, curled on her side with her mouth slightly open. Elias lay on his back staring at the ceiling for a while. She sat beside him and didn't push. "Is he going to live with us?" he said. "No," she said. "Not like that. But he's going to be around. I don't know yet what that looks like. But he's our dad." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Tommy at school has a dad who only comes on weekends," he said. "He says it's okay, but sometimes he seems sad about it. How do you feel about that possibility?" He turned his head to look at her. "I don't know yet," he said, which was her phrasing, her specific calibrated honesty, reflected back from her 5-year-old son, who had been listening more carefully than she knew. "Is that okay?" "That's more than okay," she said. "You don't have to know yet." He turned back to the ceiling. A minute later his breathing changed, and she knew he was gone, and she sat in the dark for a while longer than she needed to, listening to both of them breathe. And she let herself feel what she'd been holding at arm's length all night. Not the fear, which was done, but the specific accumulated weight of 5 years of doing this alone, and the particular complexity of understanding that the doing it alone part was over now, in ways she hadn't chosen and couldn't fully control. And that complexity was not simple grief or simple relief, but something that had both in it and several other things she didn't have words for yet. She went to the kitchen. She made coffee. She sat at the table and she let herself shake for a while, really shake, the deep muscle shaking that her body had been storing since the basement window. And when it stopped, she drank the coffee and she thought about what came next. What came next was 9 months. That was approximately how long it took to dismantle an empire that had been built over 15 years. She learned this in increments through briefings with Reyes that became a regular appointment, through the slow accretion of legal process that moved at a pace that bore no relationship to the urgency of the events that had set it in motion. Kang Jun was released from the hospital after 8 days. The federal agreement took 4 months to finalize. His attorneys, her attorneys, Reyes's team, the international prosecutors who had been building adjacent cases for years, and suddenly found themselves with a cooperating witness who had documentation they hadn't been able to get. The negotiation was complex. It was also, she was told more than once, unprecedented in its scope. He lost almost everything. That was the accurate word for it, not the sanitized legal language that described asset forfeiture and liability settlement, but the plain fact of it. The legitimate real estate portfolio was partially preserved, subjected to monitoring and restrictions. The Hasung global acquisition of the Callaway Tower was dissolved. The syndicate's operations across 3 continents were dismantled through a combination of the drive's contents and Kang Jun's direct cooperation with investigators in 4 countries. Rival organizations that had existed for decades collapsed because the financial infrastructure underneath them was exposed and seized. He gave testimony that put 11 people in prison. 3 of them he had known for more than a decade. She did not ask him how that felt, and he did not volunteer it, but she watched his face during the one deposition she was present for, and she understood that felt was not exactly the right category for what it was. Park received a federal sentence. Cho received a longer one. Jang's Chicago operational cell was arrested in the building in the hours after Reyes arrived. 7 men, 2 of whom had been in the elevator shaft when Kang Jun's team engaged them, and who had retreated when the federal presence became apparent. The Jang leadership in Seoul was indicted through the international case. The 3 vehicles on Walker Drive were impounded before morning. The 3 attorneys who had been holding her documentation, she spent 3 months working with federal investigators to determine exactly how much had been compromised. The answer was enough to have neutralized the switch, not enough to have been actionable for Jang, which meant they had been working on partial intelligence, which meant her dead man switch had not failed as completely as she had believed in those worst minutes in the conference room. 1 attorney was entirely clean, 2 had been approached and had disclosed to Jang under circumstances that the investigators characterized as coercion and that she chose not to look too closely at, because the looking would use energy she needed for other things. She rebuilt the documentation anyway. Properly this time, with federal oversight, which made it less useful as personal leverage and more useful as the thing it had always actually been, evidence. Evidence that contributed to the larger case, that went into the file alongside Kang Jun's drive and the investigators' own years of work, that became one thread in a net she had not built alone. That was the adjustment, understanding that she had not in the end done it alone, even though she had spent 5 years believing she would have to. The first time Kang Jun came to her apartment was in February, 3 months after the Callaway Tower. Reyes had cleared it. He was under monitoring, his movements logged, the conditions of his cooperation agreement specific about what he could and couldn't do, and visiting his children was in the category of things that required documentation and approval and a federal observer the first several times, which was one of the more surreal aspects of an arrangement that had several surreal aspects. The federal observer sat in a car outside. She found this both absurd and appropriate. She had told the children the night before, not everything, not the syndicate, not the specific nature of what their father had been and was in the process of ceasing to be, but the shape of it. That their father had made some very serious mistakes, that there were people who had been deciding whether he could be trusted to fix them, that he was coming tomorrow and they could decide how they felt about that. Elias said, "I already decided." She looked at him. "What did you decide?" "That I want to meet him properly." He said properly with the precision of a child who had been thinking about the distinction. "Not in an emergency." "That's fair." Nyla said nothing, which meant she was still assessing. Nyla was always still assessing. Kang Jun arrived at 11 in the morning. He knocked. which she had not entirely expected. Some part of her had braced for the version of him that simply entered rooms as though they were already his. And when she opened the door, he was standing in the hallway in a coat she hadn't seen before. And he looked different from the man in the Callaway Tower, and different from the man on the floor of the conference room, and different from the man in the Seoul penthouse 5.5 years ago, and she was not sure the differences had names yet. "Hi," he said. "Hi." They stood in the doorway for a moment. There was a specific awkwardness to it that she hadn't anticipated. She had prepared for many versions of this morning, and the version where it felt ordinary and human and slightly clumsy had not been one of them. "Come in," she said. He came in. The apartment was her apartment. The books on the shelf in the system she'd developed over 5 years. Nyla's drawings on the refrigerator. Elias's sneakers in the hallway that she'd asked him to move 4 times this week. Kongjun stopped in the hallway and looked at the sneakers. "He takes them off there," he said. "He takes them off there and does not put them where they belong." "Where do they belong?" "By the door, but inside the mat. I have explained this many times." Something moved in his face. "I'll try." She looked at him. "Don't," she said. "Don't try to parent him on the second visit." "I meant I'll try to remember the rule." "Oh." She looked away. "That's fine then." Elias came out of his room with the specific velocity of a child who had been waiting and had gotten tired of waiting. He stopped 3 feet from Kongjun and looked at him. Kongjun crouched, getting himself to eye level, which she noted, which she had not told him to do, and looked back. "I'm Elias," Elias said. "I know. Do you know my sister's name?" "Nyla." "She's shy," Elias said. "She's not actually shy, but she seems shy. She's just watching." "That's okay. She does it with everyone new." "It's smart," Kongjun said. "Watching first." Elias considered this. "She watched you for like a whole hour in the bad building." "I know, I noticed." "She decided you were okay." "Did she tell you that?" "She doesn't have to tell me. I can tell." Elias tilted his head. "Are you really going to be around?" Kongjun was quiet for a moment. "Yes." "Promise?" She watched Kongjun absorb the weight of that word. Promise, from a 5-year-old, which is heavier than the same word from any adult, because children believe in the absolute mechanics of it, and he knew that. She could see that he knew it. "Yes," he said. "I promise." Elias nodded, with the decisive quality of someone who has received the answer they were waiting for and is now prepared to proceed. "Do you want to see my dinosaurs?" "Yes," Kongjun said. "I do." Oh. Nyla came out of her room at 11:47. She had changed into her favorite dress, which Zuri noticed and said nothing about. She stood in the doorway of Elias's room and looked at her father sitting on the floor surrounded by plastic dinosaurs. While Elias explained in comprehensive detail why the Spinosaurus was objectively more impressive than the T-Rex, and she watched for approximately 4 minutes. Then she went and sat next to Kongjun on the floor. She didn't say anything. She picked up a Stegosaurus and began walking it across the carpet. Kongjun looked at her from the side. Careful, not making it a moment, not drawing attention to the crossing of that particular threshold. And then he looked back at Elias and said, "What about the Therizinosaurus?" Elias's eyes lit up. "Oh, the claws," he said, with the reverence of genuine passion. "The claws are insane." Zuri stood in the doorway and watched the 3 of them on the floor with the dinosaurs, and she thought about the penthouse in Seoul and the elevator and the 17 weeks of pregnancy and the $4,000 and the go-bag she still had in the closet and the dead man's switch she'd spent 3 years building and the 9 months of federal process and the 11 people in prison and the specific weight of a child against her chest as she ran down a back staircase, and she let all of it be true at once, all of it in the same moment, the worst of it, and this. And she didn't try to resolve the contradiction because there was no resolving it. There was only living past it into whatever the next thing was. After a while, she went to make lunch. The deposition that closed the last major thread of the federal case happened in April, 8 months after Chicago. She gave 4 hours of testimony in a federal building downtown with her attorney present, and Reyes across the table and a stenographer in the corner, and she answered every question completely and without evasion, and she did not minimize what she had known about Kongjun's activities in Seoul, and she did not minimize what she had done in the 5 years after. Both things were in the record. The full shape of it, not the version that made her look better than she had been. When it was over, she sat in the hallway outside the deposition room for a few minutes and drank water from a paper cup, and her attorney gave her the space to do that, which she appreciated. Reyes came out and sat beside her, not across, not standing, beside. "Last one," Reyes said. "For me." "Probably. The international case has its own timeline, but your testimony is complete." Zuri looked at the paper cup. "How long does the monitoring on him last?" "Formally, 2 years from the agreement date. Informally," Reyes paused, "he's cooperated with everything, gone further than required several times. If he continues, the practical restrictions start lifting well before the formal end." "Is that your assessment or the Bureau's?" "Both, currently." Zuri nodded. She looked at the institutional ceiling, the fluorescent lights, the specific aesthetic of a place designed for legal process rather than human comfort. "I didn't think he would," she said. "Give full cooperation?" "Not stop at cooperation. I thought he would cooperate because the deal required it, and the deal was good for him. I didn't think he would—" She stopped. "He gave you 3 things that weren't on the drive." 3 people he'd been protecting for personal reasons. He gave them up voluntarily. "Yes." "That wasn't required." "No." She thought about that, about what it cost, and what it meant about who he was now versus who he had been, and whether those were different enough to matter, and whether matter was even the right standard. She didn't arrive at conclusions. She had learned, in the past 8 months, that the conclusions she had believed were stable were actually positions, subject to revision as new information arrived, and that this was not a failure of character, but simply what it meant to be paying attention. "Thank you," she said to Reyes, "for moving fast that night. You gave me a building name and an organized crime syndicate in active operation," Reyes said. "We were motivated." "Still," Reyes looked at her for a moment. "You did good," she said. "The whole thing, 5 years, the documentation, the attorneys, all of it. You built something real." "It got compromised. It got partially compromised under extraordinary pressure, and it still held enough to matter." Reyes stood. "That's not nothing, Ms. Bennett." She finished the water. She put the cup in the trash. She got her coat from the chair and her bag from the floor, and she walked out of the federal building into the April afternoon, which was cold still, Chicago holding on to winter with the particular stubbornness of a city that had decided spring was not yet earned. She had a 3 o'clock meeting about a commercial property acquisition on the near north side. She had a dinner with the children tonight. She had a parent-teacher conference on Thursday that she had already rescheduled twice and would not reschedule again. She understood as she walked toward the parking structure an ordinary Tuesday, which was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the thing that had taken 5.5 years to arrive at, and she was going to treat it accordingly. The summer Elias and Nyla turned 6, Kongjun rented an apartment 12 blocks from hers, not in the same building, which they had discussed once in a conversation that was mostly practical and only briefly not, and agreed was too much too fast. For the children, they said, which was partly true, and for themselves, which was the larger truth neither of them said directly. The 12 blocks was a number that had not been explicitly negotiated but had been arrived at as though by instinct, close enough to be present and far enough to be separate, which was the specific configuration they both needed and neither could have articulated in advance. He had breakfast with the children on Saturday mornings. This had begun as a scheduled arrangement with a specific time and duration and had become, through the organic compression of habit, simply what happened on Saturday mornings. She handed them off at the door at 8, and she had 2 hours that were hers alone, which she used to run along the lakefront and drink coffee that was still hot and sit in her apartment in complete silence, which was a luxury she had not had in 6 years and which she had not expected to love as much as she did. He was learning them. She watched it happen at the edges of interactions. The Saturday mornings, the occasional weeknight dinner, Nyla's school performance that she'd mentioned once, and that he'd remembered and asked about 3 weeks later. He was learning the specific language of them. The way Elias's silence meant concentration and not upset. The way Nyla's excessive politeness meant she was uncomfortable and needed space. He was learning it carefully and without rushing it, and she had not told him to do it that way. He had understood it himself. Once, in September, She arrived to pick up the children from his apartment and found all three of them asleep on the couch. Elias against Kang Jun's arm, Nyla across his lap, Kang Jun with his head back and his mouth slightly open, and the television playing something about the ocean. She stood in the doorway with her key still in her hand and looked at them for a long moment. She took a picture. She was not sure why. She put the key back in her pocket and sat in the kitchen and waited until Nyla stirred, and she did not examine too closely what she felt in that doorway, because some things were not ready to be examined, and she had learned to recognize the difference. The conversation she had been not having with herself arrived on an evening in October, quietly and without announcement, the way things arrive when they've been waiting long enough. She was at his apartment. Not a scheduled arrangement. Elias had left a jacket there the previous Saturday, and she'd come to retrieve it on her way home from the office, which was a reason that was also not quite only a reason, but she was not going to examine that either. The children were with her mother in Atlanta for the week. The first extended visit her mother had been able to manage since everything, and Zuri had put them on the plane herself, and then returned to an apartment that was entirely, purely quiet for the first time in 6 years. He had made tea. This was something she had not known about him in Seoul, that he made tea, that he had opinions about it, that the process of making it was something he did with the same focused attention he brought to everything. He put a cup in front of her and sat across the table with his own, and there was a comfortable silence between them that was also somewhat charged, and she was tired of pretending not to know that it was charged. "I've been thinking," she said. "Okay. About what this is." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you think it is?" "I think it's complicated." "Yes. I think what you did, in Seoul that night, I think I'm never going to not be angry about it. Not every day, not even every month. But it's going to be there. It's part of the structure." "I know. And I think you've spent the last year and a half demonstrating something real, not performing it, actually being it." She looked at her tea. "I notice the difference." "I know you do. And I think—" She stopped, started again. "I think the children deserve to have both of us in the same room voluntarily, not as a scheduled arrangement, but because it's where we actually want to be. And I think I've been—" She paused. "I've been careful for so long." Careful is the correct word, not afraid, careful. There's a difference. Yes, afraid is about the other person. Careful is about protecting something worth protecting. He looked at her across the table. He was the same man who had stood at the penthouse window with his back to her, and she had thought, he doesn't feel anything. She had been wrong, and the wrongness of it had cost her 5 years and cost him more than that, and the cost was not resolved and would not be. And here they were on the other side of it, drinking tea in October in Chicago, 12 blocks and a great deal of history between them, and she was not afraid. "What are you saying?" he said. "I'm saying I want to try something that isn't scheduled." She looked at him directly. "I don't know what that looks like yet. I'm not saying everything. I'm saying something. I'm saying we can find out what the something is." He was quiet for a moment that wasn't uncertainty. She knew the difference. It was him making sure he understood exactly what she was offering before he responded. Because he had learned, she had watched him learn, over the past 18 months, the specific patience of a man who understood that the things he wanted most required him to wait for them rather than take them. "Okay," he said. "That's all." "Yes." He looked at her. "That's enough." She picked up her tea. He picked up his. Outside, Chicago did what Chicago did in October. Wind off the lake. The particular October dark that came earlier than you expected every year. And the kitchen was warm and lit and ordinary in the way of kitchens where people simply were, and she let herself be there without preparing for what came next. There was a Saturday in November that she would think about later as the first one that felt like what the future might actually look like. She had not planned it. She had come by at 8 to drop off the children as usual, and Kang Jun had said there was a market a few blocks over that was good on Saturday mornings. And she had said she knew it, and he had said he'd never been, and she had said nothing for a moment, and then she'd said all right, and they had all gone together. The market was the kind of Chicago institution that existed because of accumulated Saturdays, decades of them, the same vendors in the same positions with the same things, and the particular noise of a place that knew what it was. Elias wanted everything immediately and loudly. Nyla moved in her methodical way from stall to stall, examining, occasionally selecting. Zuri kept track of both of them by peripheral vision and the ambient noise of Elias's opinions. Kongjun stayed close without being attached. She noticed this, the calibration of it, neither too close nor too far, giving her the space she needed to operate as she always had while being present. He bought Elias something he pointed to emphatically, which she was going to address later, and he found a stall selling pressed botanicals that Nyla went still in front of, and he crouched beside her while she looked at them, and he didn't push her toward choosing, and he didn't make it into a moment. Nyla chose a small pressed fern in a frame about the size of her hand. He paid for it. She carried it the rest of the morning held against her chest with both hands. At the far end of the market, there was a point where you could see a slice of the lake between the buildings. Just a narrow blue strip, and Elias wanted to go toward it because he always wanted to go toward the water, and they followed him, and they stood at the edge of the path where the lake was visible, and Elias did the thing he did with water, which was simply face it, stand there and look at it as though receiving something. Nyla pressed against Zuri's side. Kongjun stood to her left, close enough that she was aware of the specific warmth of another person in the cold air. Elias eventually turned around and said, "Can we get hot chocolate?" "Yes," Zuri said. "Both kinds?" "There is one kind." "There are two, regular and the dark one. One each." "I want both." "Elias." "It was worth asking," he said, with absolute sincerity. And she looked at this child she had built a life around protecting, and she thought, yes, it was, it always is. Ask for what you want. Never stop asking for what you want. She did not say this. She filed it for a time when he was older and the lesson had more traction. They got hot chocolate and they started back toward the apartment. Elias walked ahead with the specific energy of a child in the first third of his stamina. Nyla walked beside Zuri with the fern held against her chest. Kongjun walked on Zuri's other side. At one point, a corner, navigating around a group coming the other way, his hand touched her elbow, briefly, to guide without pulling. She didn't move away. The moment passed and they were walking again and neither of them mentioned it. Elias turned around and walked backward, looking at his father, because he had recently discovered he could walk backward without falling and used this ability constantly. "Do you know any good dinosaur facts?" he said. Kongjun considered this seriously. The Argentinosaurus weighed approximately 80 tons. Elias's eyes went wide. 80 tons. Possibly more. Elias appeared to be doing math. That's a lot of tons. It's a significant number of tons, yes. Elias turned back around and walked forward again in the specific way of a child who has received important information and needs a moment to integrate it. Nyla looked up at Kongjun. "Do you know about the Therizinosaurus?" she said. "The claws." "Elias mentioned them," Kongjun said. "They're 3 feet long," Nyla said, with the focused calm of someone presenting evidence. "Each one." "That's remarkable." "Yes," Nyla said, and looked back down at her fern and pressed it a little closer to her chest. Zuri looked at the strip of lake visible at the end of the street and at her children walking in the November light, one fast and one measured, both of them hers, both of them also his. Both of them entirely themselves, in ways she was still discovering every day. She did not think about the penthouse in Seoul. She did not think about the elevator or the $4,000, or the go-bag in the closet that she had unpacked the previous week for the first time in 5 years and folded its contents back into regular drawers. She did not think about the conference room or the basement window or the 38 floors of a building that had felt for approximately 12 minutes like the end of everything. She thought about hot chocolate. She thought about the specific way Nyla held things she valued, careful and complete. She thought about Elias walking backward into the future with total confidence in his own balance. She thought, this is what you get if you survive it. This exact ordinary morning, this is what it was for. She did not say any of it. She walked in the November cold with the lake at the end of the street, and her family. The word arrived without announcement, without drama, simply accurate, beside her, and she let the morning be what it was. Which was enough. Which had always been, if she was honest, everything.